The call came at 6:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, staring at the backyard my father spent 30 years building into something beautiful. The roses along the fence were just starting to bloom deep red, almost burgundy, and I remember thinking he would never see them this year. My phone buzzed against the table. It was my father's attorney, Gerald Whitman. Claire. His voice was careful in the way that lawyers' voices get when they're about to change your life. I know the timing is difficult, but we need to meet, today, if possible. My father had been buried 2 days before. I told him I'd be there by 10. My husband, Daniel, was still asleep when I got dressed. We'd been married for 11 years, long enough that I could move through our bedroom in the dark without waking him, long enough that I knew every rhythm of his breathing. He was on his side, facing the window, one arm stretched out across my empty pillow. I paused at the doorway for a moment and looked at him. I don't know why I remember that so clearly. Maybe some part of me was already paying attention in a way I couldn't name yet. Gerald's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, all glass and pale wood, the kind of place designed to make you feel like important things happen there. His assistant brought me water I didn't drink and excused herself quietly. Gerald sat across from me and opened a manila folder. "Your father updated his estate plan 14 months ago," he said. "He was very deliberate about it. He wanted me to walk you through everything personally." My father had built a logistics company from the ground up over 35 years. I knew the company existed. I knew it had done well. What I did not know, what I had genuinely never known, was the full scope of what done well actually meant. Gerald slid a document across the desk. The number at the top was $38 million. I stared at it for a long time without speaking. "There's also the property portfolio," Gerald continued. "The lake house in Vermont, the commercial building on Hartwell Avenue, and a minority stake in a distribution company in Phoenix that pays out quarterly dividends." He paused. "All of it transfers to you, solely to you, Claire. Your father was very specific about that language." I looked up. "What does that mean, solely to me?" Gerald held my gaze. "It means the estate is yours as an individual. It does not transfer to or become marital property unless you choose to make it so. Your father's instructions were explicit." He folded his hands on the desk. He also left a letter, "for you to read privately." He passed me a sealed envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. I pressed it between my palms and didn't open it there. I couldn't. Not in that office with its pale wood and its water I hadn't touched. I drove home in something that felt less like grief and more like standing at the edge of a very high place, looking down, not yet sure if I was going to fall. Daniel was in the kitchen when I got back. He'd made eggs, which he only did when he was in a good mood, and he was humming something under his breath. He looked up when I came in and smiled. "How'd it go?" I set my bag down on the counter. I told myself later that I don't know why I said it, but that's not entirely true. I think I wanted to see his face. I think I wanted to believe there was nothing to see. "My father left me everything," I said. "The company, the properties. It's about $38 million. Daniel put down the spatula. The smile didn't disappear exactly. It shifted. Something moved behind his eyes fast, like a fish turning beneath the surface of dark water, and then it was gone. And he was crossing the kitchen and pulling me into a hug, saying the right things, all the right things. Warm and close and familiar, but I had seen it. I didn't say anything. I hugged him back and said I was exhausted and needed to lie down, and he said, "Of course, take all the time you need." And I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and opened my father's letter. My father was not a sentimental man. He expressed love through action, through showing up, through building things, through 35 years of choosing to stay. The letter was short, 4 paragraphs, but the last one stopped me cold. "I don't say this to frighten you, Claire Bear. I say it because I love you and I need you to be careful. Pay attention to the people around you. Not everyone celebrates your good fortune. Some people calculate it." He had signed it simply, "Dad." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in my coat pocket, close to my body, and I went to lie down. But I did not sleep. 2 weeks passed. I met with Gerald twice more, signed documents, began the process of understanding what I had inherited. Daniel came to the first meeting. He asked questions, good questions, thoughtful questions, the kind that made Gerald glance at me with a small, neutral expression I couldn't quite read. On the drive home, Daniel said we should think about restructuring our finances, consolidating accounts, making things simpler. We should talk to a financial advisor together, he said, someone who can look at the whole picture. I said that sounded reasonable. I did not tell him that I had already called Gerald that morning to ask about the legal implications of keeping the estate in my name alone. The thing about 11 years of marriage is that you develop a kind of fluency with another person. You know their tells. You know when they're performing ease rather than feeling it. I had spent a decade learning Daniel's language, and somewhere in those 2 weeks, I started to hear a word I didn't recognize. It was small things at first. He started coming to bed after I was already asleep. He took phone calls in the garage with the door pulled shut. Once, I walked past the home office and heard him speaking in a low, careful voice, and when I knocked and opened the door, he was just sitting at his desk, phone face down, looking at his laptop. Work stuff, he said, without me asking. I said okay. I started paying closer attention. The Thursday, it all broke open. I had come home early from a meeting with the estate accountant. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, checking my phone, and through the living room window, I could see Daniel pacing. He had his phone to his ear. He hadn't heard me pull in. I don't know what made me stay in the car. Some instinct, some quiet alarm in my chest. I watched him through the glass. His body language was wrong, too tense, too focused, the way he got during arguments, not during work calls. I got out of the car slowly and went in through the side door off the kitchen, the one that opens quietly if you lift the handle slightly when you turn it. Daniel was in the living room, 12 feet away, his back half turned. I heard him say, "She trusts me completely. That's not going to be a problem." I stood very still. The account consolidation makes sense. Once it's in a joint structure, it's just a matter of time. A pause. Then, quieter. She doesn't know anything about the money yet. She thinks it's still just the estate transfer process. Another pause. And then, and this is the part that put ice in my stomach, he laughed. Low and easy. The way he laughed with people he was comfortable with. People he didn't have to perform for. I know, we just have to be patient. 6 more months and we can start moving things. I stepped back into the kitchen. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the counter and breathed through my nose until they stopped. Then I walked back out the side door the same way I came in, got in my car, and drove around the block 3 times before I trusted myself to think clearly. I did not cry. I want you to understand that. Something had happened in that moment. Some wire had been cut, and what I felt was not grief. It was the terrifying, clarifying cold of understanding. 11 years. I drove to Gerald Whitman's office without calling ahead. His assistant started to explain that he was with a client. I told her it was urgent. I said my name twice, and something in my voice made her pick up the phone. Gerald came out 2 minutes later. He took one look at my face and brought me back to his office and closed the door. I told him everything I had heard, word for word. I have a good memory. I've always had a good memory, and I had spent 45 minutes in the car making sure I had it exact. Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Claire," he said carefully, "your father's instructions about the sole ownership language. I don't think that was precautionary. I think he knew something." I stared at him. He asked me several questions in our last meeting about asset protection, about what happens to an inheritance if a marriage dissolves, about whether a spouse could access funds transferred into a joint account. Gerald paused. I didn't ask him why. I answered the questions and structured the estate accordingly. But now I think I understand why he asked. My father had been trying to protect me. He had done it quietly, from his deathbed, without ever saying a word to me, because he knew I would defend Daniel. He knew I loved him. He had built me a wall I didn't even know I was standing behind. I pressed my hands together in my lap. "What do I do?" I asked. Gerald leaned forward. "First, nothing changes. You go home and you act exactly as you have been. Second, you call this number." He wrote something on a card and slid it across the desk. "She's a forensic accountant. She's going to need access to everything, your joint accounts, your shared financial history, any documentation you can photograph without raising suspicion. Third, he paused. You stop telling Daniel anything about the estate. As of today, he knows nothing more than what he already knows." I looked at the card. How long? I asked. A few weeks. Maybe less if she finds what I think she's going to find. I drove home. I made dinner. I sat across the table from Daniel and asked him about his day, and he told me about a conference call that had run long, and I nodded and said that sounded frustrating. He refilled my water glass without being asked. He told me I looked tired and I should take it easy. I'm okay, I said. I'm just still processing everything. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We'll get through this together, he said. That's what we do. I looked at his hand on mine. I thought about my father's letter in my coat pocket. I thought about the word patience spoken in the low, comfortable voice of a man who thought he was alone. I know, I said. You're right. The forensic accountant's name was Renata. She was small and precise and spoke in complete sentences. She called me 8 days later and asked me to come in. What she had found took her 40 minutes to walk me through. It had started approximately 20 months ago before my father was even diagnosed. Small transfers, irregular enough not to flag automated monitoring, from a personal account Daniel had opened in his name only. The account received regular deposits from a source Renata had traced to a consulting LLC registered in Delaware. The LLC had one other associated name on its filings. She turned her monitor toward me. My chest seized. The name was my cousin, Marcus. Daniel and Marcus had been friends for years, had introduced themselves at our wedding rehearsal dinner, a fact I had always found charming, a fact that now felt like something else entirely. The LLC has no clients on record, Renata said. No contracts, no invoices. It exists only to move money. The transfers into Daniel's personal account total. Over 20 months, she clicked to the summary page $240,000. I was very still. There's more, she said. I found a document in your shared cloud storage. It was in a folder labeled Tax Archives 2019. She turned the monitor again. It was a draft, a rough outline of a financial plan timeline, account structures, projected values. At the top, in Daniel's neat, familiar handwriting, was a single header: Post, Transfer Strategy. The document was dated 4 months before my father's diagnosis. He had been planning this before he even knew my father was sick. He had been planning it on the premise that one day, inevitably, my father would die and I would inherit something significant. He had been patient. He had been so extraordinarily patient. I thought about 11 years of small kindnesses, the water glass refilled, the eggs on good mornings, the hugs that felt like home. I thanked Renata. I asked her to compile everything into a format suitable for an attorney. She said she already had. Gerald connected me with a lawyer named Patricia Soames, who specialized in both family law and financial fraud. I met with her that afternoon. By the end of the week, she had filed 2 things: a legal preservation order on all joint financial accounts, freezing any transfers, and a formal complaint with the State Financial Crimes Unit, supported by Renata's documentation. Patricia also told me what to do next. I went home. I cooked dinner. I watched television with Daniel on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, some crime drama we'd been following for months. At one point, he kissed the top of my head and said we should take a vacation soon, somewhere warm. That sounds perfect, I said. 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning, Daniel left for work at 8 o'clock. I watched him pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Then I spent 3 hours, working from a list Patricia had given me, photographing documents, copying files, removing my personal valuables. I had already transferred the full estate into a protected account structure that Daniel had no access to and no legal claim on. At noon, Patricia called. The Financial Crimes Unit had moved faster than expected. They were ready. At 2:15 that afternoon, 2 investigators arrived at Daniel's office building. Patricia had advised them on the exact documentation trail. I was not there. I did not watch. But Patricia called me at 3:45 and told me it was done. I was sitting in my father's old armchair in the house I had grown up in, the one I had inherited along with everything else. The afternoon light came through the windows the same way it always had. The roses in the backyard were in full bloom by then. Patricia said, "They've served him. His accounts are frozen pending investigation. Marcus's LLC has been flagged as well." I said, "What happens now?" She said, "Now it becomes a legal process. Your part is largely done." I sat in my father's chair for a long time after she hung up. I held his letter in my hands. I had carried it with me every day since Gerald gave it to me, and I read the last paragraph one more time. Pay attention to the people around you. Not everyone celebrates your good fortune. Some people calculate it. He had known. Somehow, in the way that fathers sometimes know things they can't quite prove, he had known. And he had loved me quietly and carefully and in advance, in the particular language he spoke, building walls, structuring documents, leaving instructions, so that by the time I needed to be protected, I already was. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. Outside, the red roses moved in the wind, and somewhere in the house the old floorboards settled, and I sat very still and let myself feel, for the first time in weeks, the full weight of what I had just walked through and come out the other side of. I was 31 years old. I had just buried my father. I had just dismantled a marriage that had been built, at least in part, on a calculation about my future. And I was still here. I made a cup of coffee, the first one in weeks I actually drank, and I sat in my father's chair in the afternoon light, and I started to think about what I wanted to build next. Not what Daniel had mapped out, not what Marcus had helped plan, not the life that had been quietly arranged around the assumption of my inheritance and my trust. Mine. Built on what I knew now, which was more than I had ever known before. Outside, the roses held their color as the light shifted. I watched them for a long time. My father had always said the best investments were the ones made quietly, without announcement, with patience and care. I think now I finally understood what he meant.